Now, panellists, I've been using the internet for 25 years, and I've spent a lot of that time since telling everyone how awesome and world-changing it was going to be. And these days, the past couple of years, I have had moments where I think, sorry everyone, it turned out to be a terror dome. Is it just me? Is it just me, Melissa?
No, I don't think so. So I've spent 24 years working in digital media, and 10 years of that time has been inside media organisations. And I think what we have seen with the proliferation of extremism is the unintended effects of two very important key metrics that executive leaders in digital companies think about, and that's reach and engagement. And there was Radio New Zealand carried an interview with YouTube programmer Guillaume Chasleau last week, where he said he was fired when he raised questions about the way the algorithms sent people to extreme and divisive content. And so I think all of us in digital media are perhaps feeling a little bit uncomfortable about where it's gone. And it's really encouraging to see that, even the fact that the theme of ethics has been such a, actually all-encompassing theme in this conference means we're actually starting to think about it.
Does anyone else want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're, really at a turning point with the internet. As you say, it's about 25 years that we've all been using it. We kind of take the benefits for granted. It really took off in a way, after the advent of the iPhone and sales of the iPhone really ramped up around 2012. So, tomorrow I'll be at the airport and everybody there will be on their device. And the magic of those devices, of course, is the internet. But, now we have some unintended consequences that, you're alluding to. A whole generation of kids growing up who were always screen connected, and what does that mean? The reach and engagement metrics. But then in addition, when the technology is so pervasive, just bad actors. And bad actors are a fact of life. And now we have to be much more deliberate about thinking about the bad actors. If you layer on top of that sort of the interesting fact that the internet is essentially unregulated, right? I mean, there's an agency that handles the domain name system, but beyond that, there's sort of nothing. And that's always been considered a feature, right? I mean, there's like a libertarian ethos among tech companies, at least, of this is outside the control of any government, and that's a good thing, is the ethos, and this is outside the control of any corporation. But maybe we're coming to a point now where it's so powerful and it's so pervasive that we really need to come together and kind of envision a future that will address the kind of concerns, Sean, that you were just raising, because they are so important. So we have to sort of envision that and then figure out how to bring about the world that, that we want to see.
I think from a marketer's standpoint, having worked similarly and noticing the reach and engagement conundrum and trying to have really strong discussions about this at the table in big corporations, it brings up the fact that after Christchurch, our big telcos and other businesses got together to say, we have to do something, and right now all we know to do is to stop advertising on your channels. So they're already having those conversations and saying, right now this is all we know to do, because they see the evil inherent and the humans behind the businesses went, we need to do something.
I thought that was quite notable when it was proving difficult to get the platform owners to block the snuff video. Mm-hmm. The telcos actually swung into action. They took it very seriously. But right. Are they the people we want doing this? Because David talked about things that we've assumed are a feature, and one of the features right through has been that your ISP has nothing to do with the content of what you look at on the internet. Is there a line there? Or do we just have to accept that the situation is so serious now that this is where we go?
I'm not sure about the line. if it even exists right now, but I know that people follow where the money goes. I personally was in touch with the heads of YouTube and Facebook, both here and overseas, when this was happening, and I had to go through as one of the other pairs of eyes and go, here's another link, here's another link. So at that point, AI was failing us, and the big platforms were failing us.
Thomas?
Yeah, I guess as I'm reflecting on this, I want to, and I've been here all day thinking about just the wider questions of how artificial intelligence and technology more broadly is created and in what context it's created. And I guess I've got some fundamental questions in my mind that go well beyond Christchurch, that go well beyond the internet. And I kind of want to, maybe I can just lay them out on the table briefly, and then we'll see who I provoke, either in the audience or on the panel. But I guess I'm thinking, I'm not a technologist. I'm more of a thinker about society and social change. And my background is armed conflict and thinking about the impact of war on civilians and civilian communities. And, I've been sitting here thinking, there's been a lot of talk about creating value with companies, and I get that. That's the model we're living in. But I'm sort of struck by to an extent, the lack of engagement around things like inequality, the fact that 8 men in the world have the same wealth as the bottom half of the entire of humanity, and half of those 8 men are tech entrepreneurs, by the way. The fact that all of the scientists are screaming out about ecological decline, about climate, and I guess I'm thinking, if I were a tech entrepreneur, or if I were in this space, I'd be wanting to say, I want to direct all of my energy and all of my power and influence towards solving these problems. And if I'm not, then what am I doing? So I guess I wanted to lay that down. Not to call out any particular actor or anyone. I mean, we all live in this world. We're all struggling with how do we kind of come to grips with some of these existential questions. But I guess I appeal to the humanity of everyone here to think about how are we directing our energy towards these absolutely critical, urgent problems.
Although I would observe that you might be able to get something approaching a consensus on that in this room. I spend a lot of time on social media. You would not get a consensus on that. Is that part of the problem, that we have become a society of extremes when we go online?
Yeah, well, I'll say one more thing before I, to annoy everybody. I don't want to be the moralistic, lefty preacher from a university. But I guess I'm thinking one thing about AI and technology that strikes me is that to what extent can it be a fundamentally dehumanizing technology? It individuates us away from each other in a way, doesn't it? Sometimes when we're sort of addicted to our screens and reduced to data points. And the one thing I want to say about that is, I spend a lot of time thinking about autonomous weapons. And right now in Geneva at the UN, there's a convention of diplomats thinking about how we deal with autonomous weapons, lethal autonomous weapon systems, which rely on emerging AI and technology. And one of the considerations there is that the algorithms behind these autonomous weapons, essentially, they work on target profiles, right? And in a way, developing these target profiles, these embedded target profiles, it reduces humans to data points. And isn't that a fundamental violation of our human right to dignity? So, there's another conundrum.
I mean, we already know it's kind of a truism that AI is only as good as the people who design it. But how do we design it to be better? We know that it conveys biases even without the conscious, even without its designers being conscious. How do we avoid that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here, right? The first of these is, I'm not sure we really understand how this stuff works, which should kind of take a deep breath in and go, wow, all right? And I think the reality is a very different kind of intelligence to us, right? It'd be like chimpanzees going, I wonder if this guy's smart. He seems to read and talk a lot, but I don't know how good he is at doing things that we consider smart, like climbing trees and whatnot. Right, so we're in this place, right? We don't even know what smart means, and I think when I always think about artificial intelligence, I think of the artificial piece, right? It's not human, it's different, and it should be a thing that we treat like a different intelligence. Now, where it comes at the moment, and I think to that point of what have we directed it towards? The answer is sort of nothing, but we say sort of nothing, but what we really mean is economic, right? It's optimized on economics, right? YouTube's algorithm is optimized on economics. There's the same things that get reported every quarter in its annual filings and the quarterly 10K regulatory information with your income statement and your balance sheet. That's kind of what it's optimizing for. So you've got a set of algorithms that are effectively super intelligent beings optimizing for capitalist gain, right? And that's the world that we're in. Now, the ramifications of that are all sorts of things that we're seeing and observing, right? And I think one of the things we always say is like, well, we need to kind of go and get the tech people to go and solve our problems. I was like, well, when did the democracy work like that, right? To maybe it's a bit of a straw man, but I'm going to burn it. Right, like it's about people. We've got to engage in a conversation about what sort of society we want, and we should do it in a way that acknowledges the incredible technology that we've created and decide what we want to do with it. But if we sit back and say, hey, Facebook, I hope you look after us, we're missing the point, right? So we're a democracy. We decide what we want, what we don't want. It's time for us to have that discussion. And Facebook can go and, who cares? Like, if they like it, they don't, right? We'll go and build whatever the New Zealand equivalent of Trade Me is for Facebook.
That's actually a very interesting point, because it's a discussion that we've been forced into having by an atrocity.
It should have happened.
Are you saying that every nation should be having this discussion?
We should have had this 5 years ago, right? It's something I'm glad it's happening today, but it should have happened 5 years ago. And there's no reason it couldn't have, right?
Yes.
Can I just say, I think the other thing is that thinking about the unintended effects of design, one of the ways to try and avoid the effects, which was your question, is to make sure that we have diverse thinkers on a team. And so that's about diverse hiring decisions. It's about bringing in expertise that you don't necessarily have in your own product teams, and actually building into your workflows part of a process where you are considering the ethics. I think Adam Cutler's talk yesterday was terrific, because what we were seeing was the journey of a designer from I don't know anything about ethics to actually somebody who felt accountable.
Because we've seen stories about how AI can actually be quite sexist, and that's a result of who makes it.
Yeah, I was just going to note, I was talking to some people in one of the breaks, and the digital assistants. Has anyone noticed how the digital assistants, the holographic images, they're often women, aren't they? I mean, not always, but I think that's a reflection of some of these structural issues that we face.
Louise, I want to bring you in here. I mean, one interesting thing. I mean, we've been talking a lot about threats and about danger, but there are technologies that promise public benefit and safety, and are both. And yet are worrying at the same time. AI surveillance systems, facial recognition systems, they can be used for good or ill.
Yeah, both. I mean, there are a whole raft of ways that technology can help us, right from facial recognition systems, AI-powered surveillance systems, through to drones. I went to Spark's 5G lab last week and saw some innovative ways that it can be used, and I think 5G is going to just cause an explosion of innovation, so it's going to be really interesting to see how we can sort out some problems like health and safety. It sounds mundane, but if we can get drones powered by 5G and AI flying over construction sites, we can pick out people who aren't wearing hard hats. Another example, Volvo has just announced that it's releasing a car which can use AI to detect when drivers are becoming distracted or are perhaps drunk. The car can actually pull over itself and call emergency services. So it's not just the macro ways that technology can help, but it's also those sort of more micro ways that our lives are being enhanced and safety is being improved. The flip side of that, of course, is that there are implications for privacy and also the risk of algorithmic bias. Privacy has been talked about a lot today by the panel earlier, which some excellent discussion, but just touching on algorithmic bias, I think it's a really important discussion that we need to have if it's going to be used in law enforcement or the criminal justice system in particular. In America, for example, there's a sentencing system that was being used, and that was found to be racially biased against African Americans. So, you know, we want to make sure that something doesn't happen in New Zealand like that, using law enforcement or sentencing systems which are racially biased against Māori or Pacifica communities.
Anyone else on that? One thing that struck me is the question of the title of this session refers to safer societies. I don't think we've even defined what safer societies are. I mean, how do we go about that, Cassie?
Again, that's another one that's going to take a lot of different diverse opinions and different people from different ways of life, and how New Zealand is, I mean, obviously I have an accent that is different to the New Zealand accent, but New Zealanders, I've been here 16 years, and diving into data around who we're marketing to, whether it was dirty old retail or it was banking, whatever it is, and the shape of New Zealand has changed. So how do we define safety? It's one of those things that it's how long is a piece of string? I can remember before we had some of the laws that made bullying and threats online when they didn't exist. And I myself had a horrific case of stalking for 2 years. I was horrified. It was scary. I was terrified. And when the laws changed, the fellow left the country because the government finally said, we are going to take this online stuff seriously. And when they put safety first, but safety changed and evolved the definition of it. So I don't actually know.
Yeah, I guess just to weigh in, so I totally agree, online safety is critical. Also, obviously, safety against physical threat, whether it's domestic or international. But also, I think really importantly, safety is having an environment or society where you're safe to be your authentic, true self. So you're free to manifest your religious beliefs by going to pray in a mosque on a Friday, or if it's being part of the LGBT community, or whether you're an ethnic minority. And I think that's one of the scary things about the social credit scheme in China. It's actually disincentivising people from being their true, authentic selves, and it's incentivising people to conform. So I think that's one of the most terrifying things for me about that social credit scheme.
But, well, maybe put it back, if the social credit scheme was implemented in New Zealand and had caught this person before the attacks were carried out, would that be a price we're willing to pay? And I think that's the question here, is like, there's costs of these things, right? If we want a certain level of safety, freedom will be curtailed. One of the freedoms you can't have is a white nationalist. If that's your true self, sorry, you can't be here. Right?
I guess there all have to be limits on your freedom of expression.
Right, that's exactly right. Where do we want to put those limits, right? And we're saying we want freedom of expression, want to be ourselves, but you can't be like this, right? And I think we can agree there are some things you can't be, right? And we say, well, all right, so how much of our privacy are we willing to give up in order to live collectively in a safer place with less extremism? And I would say we actually need to kind of have that debate and say, look, we are going to say this is unacceptable, and we are going to give up some privacy, but let's have that debate of what's unacceptable and what privacy.
I was just saying, so the way I sort of read that question, safer societies, I kind of thought, well, safer for whom and safer how? And I guess I was sort of zooming out a bit, and I don't know if we can flick up that graphic that you had, Sean, but that's the last one of your last slide, but it basically shows a very scary inequality picture that's coming at us. And if we combine that inequality picture with what we know is coming down in terms of ecological decline, the glaciers are melting in the headwaters of the Indus Valley in Pakistan, which feeds 1.3 billion people. That we're talking about India and Pakistan, both nuclear-armed countries. These are things we're going to have to grapple with in our lifetimes. So I kind of think that's the sort of safer society level question that I want us to be focusing on. And I feel like if we look around the world, liberalism, this kind of overarching ideology that has created so much wealth for so many shareholders around the world, it is fraying at the edges. We have national populism on the rise in Europe, in Latin America, in the United States. It's a serious problem, right? I think we need to open our eyes, wake up, and grapple with why it is why national populism is on the rise, and what sort of interventions do we all as humans, and especially the vastly wealthy tech industry, how do we want to contribute to developing the sorts of structures and systems for society that are actually going to make us safer in the longer term, you know?
And I think just to kind of like build on that, we were, I think, in the old political structure in a place where there was a sense that the population had power. Yeah. You worked, and if you didn't work, you could form a union, you could get out of there, you say, I'm not going to do that. And there was power, there was a dynamic. As we've seen through automation, and particularly we're going to see through this next wave of cognitive automation, it's not that, hey, you're exploiting me as a worker. It's changed to, you're no longer relevant to the profits I'm making. And that's going to change a huge amount, because you say, oh, I'm not, I'm going to strike. You say, well, okay, you didn't have a job for you anyway, right? And I don't think we've really addressed the kind of a political system where, for a lot of profit, people are irrelevant, right? That's the first time we've ever run into that. And I think this is why I think it needs to kind of go back. Liberalism, as we've had it, is not going to be, I think, the political structure that we're going to go into the next decade with. And we're seeing it fraying. And when things fray, it's the people who are planned and organised and ready are the ones that take advantage of that. And that has been the nationalists and the populists.
It strikes me that until we all have these conversations we're talking about, our ethical baseline for most of what we do online is the community standards of the platform providers. And last week on Facebook there was a fake news video that claimed that Hillary Clinton and Jacinda Ardern had conspired to stage the Christchurch attack.
Yeah, because John Podesta, her campaign manager, had been in New Zealand just days before.
Yeah,
right?
that fitted with it. And of course multiple people were offended by that and reported it, and they all got the same reply, no, this doesn't breach Facebook's community standards. Did Facebook make the right call there? Because it wasn't a call to violence, it was just bullshit.
I mean, this is the big question, right? Because on the face of it, it's not, you could make the argument that it's not offensive, but the problem is the volume of alternative facts that have kind of risen up in the place of actual facts. And you look at what's happened globally to the news media, and Facebook a few weeks ago was bemoaning the fact that they couldn't cover enough local and regional perspectives because there wasn't enough original content being created, and it's because news media no longer has a business model because all of the advertising revenue has gone to the platforms, and the platforms are encouraging, again, these fake viewpoints because that's what's generating reach and engagement. So at what point do we say this, liberal economics is actually broken, and how do we get humanity back into how we conduct business? And I think it's really interesting that in New Zealand we've got the wellbeing budget and this whole idea of a wellbeing framework where we're not just thinking about fiscal measures but also social and you think about things like global inequality, and that's not going to go anywhere if things continue the way they are. So how do we bring people's well-being, into our business models?
It is ironic that at the very time when we sort of need journalists more than ever, as you say, their business model has been decimated by online advertising, and so journalists are being laid off. But the traditional journalistic role, obviously, as you know, is to vet the truth. But this internet model, again, with its unregulated nature, is anybody can post anything. There are efforts underway, which I think we need to build on, to build like sort of the equivalent of, I don't know if you have it here in New Zealand, but the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. So, some kind of a method where some group of journalists are taking a look at stories like this, and there's some notation next to it that indicates, this could be nonsense. And there's signals, that an AI system could use to help with this, like, how viral is it, and what was the source of it, and that sort of thing. And I think we need to combine that with education. So, I think people are credulous just by nature, and something like this story comes in, and the more outrageous it is, almost the more interesting it is, and it's, wow, look at that, Hillary Clinton was involved. Click forward. I guess Facebook took a step the other day to limit, I think on WhatsApp maybe, your ability to auto-forward things. It used to be to 256 people, now it's down to 5. I think they did this in India first, where terrible rumors were leading to deaths. But maybe we need more of that too, combined with education of people, of look for the journalistic seal of approval and think twice about what you're forwarding, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the idea of a trust mark around truthful content is actually a terrific idea, and that perhaps is one of the ways that tech could create more safety by indicating quality under information. I saw some statistic the other day that we're exposed to, about 70% of the information we're exposed to is untrue. So that's, something to think about.
I guess, I was at a workshop the other day with, and there were some people there who were kind of, newspaper and senior media editors, and there were some people who deal with the internet in New Zealand and so on. And one of the couple of points of discussion there, which were really encouraging, I thought, well, at least thought-provoking on this topic. One was, should there, is the basic business model behind online media, and is it broken? The idea of eyeballs for advertising. I mean, is that business model going to ever really work or do we actually need to think about changing that business model? Maybe that's.
Well, Apple would agree that it's broken, and their $10 a month thing, you can jump on and get that. It's great if you have your $1,000 iPhone. Yeah. Maybe not if you don't have that. So I think one of the things that was, as I look at this, is core tenets of democracy. I mean, the media is one of the key estates. Yeah. If you don't have that, you don't have democracy, right? So if we want to live in a country which has democratic values, we need to fund journalism, right? Totally. And we should be funding it out of bloody tax from the companies that are making the money that decimated it. And you say, thank you, we'll take that back and put it back into a journalist.
100%, yeah, totally agree.
Never let it be said that tech is full of libertarians.
I'm a small population, an otherwise very liberal libertarian city.
Although we're all cursing the internet here, I must say that my media colleagues aren't always doing us a favour either. And I know that sometimes even the editors hate publishing this stuff, but the kinds of ideas that animated the Christchurch attack aren't that far from things you have been able to read in the mainstream media, let alone on certain New Zealand blog sites in the comments. And I wonder whether part of the problem of spotting this kind of thing and addressing it is that it's really hard to pick out from the background noise. Some of this idea of the invader rhetoric, that was pretty mainstream. How big a problem is that?
Well, I think it's a huge problem. And I think I don't want to single out Mike Hosking, but I'm just going to single out Mike Hosking. So I understand that his daily column on the New Zealand Herald gets twice as many hits as any other story on the New Zealand Herald website every day.
A lot of those are hate clicks, but yes.
Yeah, well, I make it. I don't know, but we can't just criticise Mike Hosking, right? Because he's read because he represents views that are well understood and appreciated in society. So I think we need to have it comes back to this question that people have been articulating, which is what kind of society do we want to live in? And I feel like we're quite often systematically disempowered by the interactions we have with power in the world. Me less than others because I'm a white educated male, but we're disempowered to think that we can change things. Right? When actually the history of humanity is a history of dramatic change in a broadly positive direction. So I kind of feel like we need to sort of wake up out of this complacency that we don't have power to change things and actually get organised. And the other thing I was thinking is New Zealand. A couple of people have mentioned this in presentations today. New Zealand is in a position to organise itself quite well. Things move through our system, our political and economic system, quite quickly. We saw that in 1984 when we radically reshaped our economy in a particular direction. We can do things to radically reshape our systems of economic, industrial, and social organisation, and I think we should. Yeah.
To go on that, and you touch upon a really, I think, interesting point. Where do we draw the line? Is Mike Hosking for hate speech, right? Is it? And, I think we would probably say, I don't agree with it, maybe, but no, right? But he's got a right to speak. And we have to be careful we don't remove a right to speak. I mean, if we said, look, here's the way you need to think, and if you deviate from that, then you're in trouble and you're not going to have a presence. Well, now you are into social credit in China, right? I think the heart of a democracy is debate and free debate, and the idea that through a changing environment that's very, very complex, we come together and debate issues and come to some form of a consensus, if not agreement. That, I think, is one of the only tools that we have as human intelligence to keep ourselves going, which is debate, and we must embrace that. And at the same time, we have to balance that with some places we say collectively won't go. And Germany is a really interesting example of this, right? They said, you will not deny the Holocaust anywhere here. That is not going to happen, and we will enforce that. And Facebook, you better put people. And Facebook has got 1,000 people sitting in Germany, mostly determining whether or not someone's saying that's a Holocaust that didn't happen, right? And so, I think we have to balance this. And it's not just, I think we could swing too far one way. So that's one piece there. I think the other bit that comes through on this is fundamentally, I don't think we fully understand this world that we're moving into, right? And I think some of the hate that comes out is a lot of it, as I look and listen to it, is say, the world coming into my world is bad, and I've seen it, and it be bad, right? And everything that I've seen with the global world coming into my community has been bad. Yeah. And there's certainly in America, a lot of people have felt that. You see in Britain, a lot of people felt that. They feel like their world has been changed as a result of globalism. And I think globalism has done some people very well. It's lifted a lot of people out of poverty. But that little middle dip, what used to be known as middle class people, by and large in the Western world haven't done well. And they're pushing back against globalism because they're saying, you've screwed me, right? And we can't go and say, you can't be angry about your situation, right?
Yeah. So what do we do?
Just picking up on a couple of things that are happening overseas. So there was the EU Code of Conduct of disinformation, which was signed in 2018 with a few major players like Facebook and Mozilla and others. Their approach is quite... it's reasonably hands-off. It's to demote fake news, for example, rather than removing it. It's also to focus on promoting digital literacy, a point that you mentioned before, and the importance of making consumers aware that not all news on Facebook is newsworthy. And the UK has sort of taken a different approach. They released a report in February, and they're proposing a mandatory code of conduct that tech companies will have to sign up to, which will have independent regulatory oversight. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out this year, because that seems to be somewhere between the EU's approach, Germany's approach of take it down or face a €50 million fine.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is something I've been banging on about for 20 years. I used to write a column and I wrote about this. We still don't teach kids in school in any comprehensive, structured way how to tell good information from bad.
Well, my kids have been learning about tree octopuses. Apparently there's a website with tree octopuses, so teachers can point to them and say, this is what fake news looks like.
That's good. David, you're an older member of the panel like myself. You will recall John Gilmore of the EFF famously saying, the net interprets censorship as damage and routes around it. Yeah. And we all thought that was a great thing because, it is that way for good reasons. Is there a possibility that we've created something that we can't really control in the way we've been talking about?
The sense of the discussion at the whole conference today, and then I think on this panel, is that the internet has grown so big, so fast, and then the potential uses of AI, which can be so positive, but then can also be negative. It's all sort of coming together now where we do need to think about, is it okay to have an internet where it sort of roots around, as that quote was, any effort to block something? And it may be that the answer is no at this point. The really challenging thing, as we've been discussing, is what are those standards? And there's so many tricky things that come up, given just the infinite range of human expression. There's satire, there's irony, there's different values in different countries. I'm thinking of a case in Georgia where there was a photographer and she was photographing her own children naked in a way that seemed, arty and kind of cool to her and to many people. And to other people in Georgia, it was like, this looks like child pornography. And so it was in the eye of the beholder. And then there's, the fact that we're going to need AI systems to do a lot of the moderation because there's just way too much content for people to do. And AI systems can obviously make mistakes. And so I'm thinking of a case, I think it was in Finland, where a publication posted to Facebook the famous terrible image of a girl in Vietnam who'd been hit with napalm, and I'm sure you've all seen it, and she's running in horror. And Facebook's anti-child pornography AI picked that up and blocked it. And the Finnish site was saying, hey, you censored my content. It's completely legitimate. It's like a Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph. You shouldn't block that. And then, of course, they unblocked it. But it's all super, super challenging.
And yet we also know that if we leave too much of that decision-making up to human moderators, we're brutalizing those people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are people who look for child sexual abuse materials online all day, and it can blow their minds. And then there's the terrorist content, too. It's actually a distinct category.
I think, sorry. No, yeah. I was going to say, it's almost we've been gifted this stream of information, more than we could ever want, about more than anything we could ever know. We've been gifted that, and it's been amazing. The internet gave us that. And it said, here, have this. Then he said, the only cost to this is that the only way you can filter this is by popularity. Yeah. And if you said, oh man, so I can navigate through this based on what everyone else likes. You've given me the world's gift of every bit of information, but the only thing I can do is what everyone else likes. Ah, oh, that sucks, yeah. Right? And I think if you look at this, the algorithms are driven by popularity. Yeah. That's the single tool to filter the information. Maybe there's a little bit of demographic information and so on, but by and large, it's popularity. Now, we haven't caught up in AI yet to go anything more than that, but we're getting to a place where you start reading this stuff and you start to understand, oh, you said this, and I don't have any other evidence for that, so maybe I'm not going to promote this as quickly, right? Or you said that, which is in direct contradiction to this, therefore, if I'm going to show you that, I'm also going to show you this. Now, as we get better with language, we get better at understanding what's actually in human knowledge, we'll be able to go beyond popularity. But to date, we only really have popularity. And I think it's kind of like, they say with cars, cars are a wonderful thing. It's just a shame we didn't have self-driving cars when we got, the initial car, because millions of people have killed themselves because we didn't invent the self-driving fast enough. And I think that's where we are with this. We're in this kind of little space at the moment where the algorithms that we've got to filter are insufficient for the task and have very, very bad side effects. And it's like, back in the day, we didn't have enough calories and we starved and they were starved. Right now we don't, because we invented a very cheap food, but we have obesity and diabetes. At the moment, we've got the same kind of symptomatics. These are analogous. We've got obesity and diabetes in the information space, right? And it's causing us harm because we've created cheap information and no way to kind of regulate and modify it other than popularity.
We do need to get to some questions from the audience. We have some, haven't we?
We have a lot of amazing questions. And a lot of them are kind of centered around what we've already talked about. Well, the most recent question is, why do governments not create a world forum like the economic one for AI?
Say that again.
Yes. Why don't world governments create a world forum like the economic one for AI?
I was just at the World Government Summit in Dubai with 50 other AI ministers and ethicists and practitioners. And it was very, very positive, I got to say. Like, it was an incredibly positive day to bring a lot of people together to think about this. Again, it's probably 5 years too late, but it is happening, and there's no reason it can't happen in New Zealand, right? And it should.
I can speak, I'll start. I can speak to that on an international level. One of the other things I cover as a journalist is drug policy. I was at the UN in 2016 when there was the prospect of changing the UN conventions, which pretty much all the liberal world wanted to happen. And it was astonishing watching the countries where human rights are not valued block every single thing. You know, there's no doubt about the evidence. If you were looking at the evidence, you would do this. But Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, all countries with the death penalty blocked it. And I think it's doing it as part of an international forum is easy to talk about, but boy, it's going to be hard.
So I just want to say, I really think New Zealand could do a lot more in this space. We used to be celebrated internationally for having a really proactive, sort of activist foreign policy on human rights, on disarmament, on environmental issues. You know, the law of the sea came from us, etc. Our entire foreign affairs apparatus has really shifted its focus to trade, mainly dairy and tourism, and raw materials. That's a shame. And I think we need to correct that desperately, because the world is not awash with normative, resolute leadership amongst the diplomatic forums that govern things. You know, we have a huge opportunity. I think we've got the Prime Minister to do it, and I think we've got the kind of population that could come in behind it. So, and I think we've got the context now, post-Christchurch, with the anger and frustration around these social media platforms and, you know, the internet more broadly. We've got the context to do that, so I hope we do.
I think, too, having spent a week in the States last week, so watching with different eyes through different media lenses, the world is looking to New Zealand now. As you've said a few times, we need to organize. Sitting around a table of 23 conservative family members who, as the little rainbow sheep in the family, kind of just sits in the corner sometimes. It was fascinating to hear so many people say, New Zealand's Prime Minister is how most leaders should lead. It's how these are conservative people who voted for Trump going, wow, what a leader. So it feels like the time.
Yeah.
I think the thing is, what she has shown is that humanity and empathy is actually a way that you can conduct yourself in extremis. And I think the other authenticity that New Zealand has to build on, you know, where we're at now and that sense of urgency that Christchurch has created in us, is in an Indigenous culture and a treaty with that Indigenous culture that is unique in the world, and who, if you all heard Te Araha talk at the start of the conference, they completely understand spirituality, cognition and heart in mataranga and tikanga. And I think what Jacinda has done actually is almost belatedly done a porphyry for the Muslim communities in New Zealand that's meant that they've actually felt welcome for the first time.
That's right. One more question. This is going to change gears a little bit. Can we create an AI to act like the egg boy?
That would be awesome.
I just thought we'd get a little giggle from that one. Glad it worked.
Yeah, well, I think someone who did what Egg Boy did just got charged with a criminal offence, so tricky. Yeah. One more, go on.
Oh, one more. This is aimed at you, Sean, but I think more of us can have a say in it too. Are we at peak social? Have we reached a breaking point? And is it possible going forward that with AI being super helpful to our lives, will it crowd out the bad? I guess is the question. The wasteful stuff.
I think we will look back at 2016 and the elections and say, wow, wasn't it great when we read news? I know it was fake, but geez, we read news. Scroll, 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 picture like, hey, there's a vacation. I wish I was there. I don't know.
Because it's an interesting proposition, because people are expressing that view that it's over for me in social media, whether they get to it or not.
I'll take a slightly more. I'll stand by that statement. But a serious cut of this. Facebook can't, in its incarnation, with the technology it has, become an arbiter of truth in the world. It is not set up for that. The technology doesn't exist. And if it seeks to go into kind of censoring something that is not or true, maybe it can do it on a newsfeed. Then it says, well, I'm going to do it on WhatsApp. So if you tell me anything that's wrong to your friend, I'm going to cut that. And any kind of like path down this line, it's just you unwind and you say it's impossible for Facebook to be an arbiter of truth in the world. And if we expect it to do that, or we expect social media to do that, we're gonna be, deluding ourselves. So we will not. So social, I don't believe in its current form will exist ever again because it is too manipulable, and it is too big a part of our lives to control our view into the world on something that's making $30 a year by buying and selling us to a set of algorithms. It's ridiculous. We'll look back at this and our kids will say, geez, that's going to be equivalent to putting, bloody asbestos in as a thing. So, it keeps us warm. Right?
Well, the world is literally on fire and
this was an attack that happened against our way of life, generated by extremist actors on, and enforced by an internet they went on to the platforms that we've created and utilized that in the same way that the terrorists that utilized airline networks to inflict the maximum possible damage. If this isn't the end of social, what is? Right? It can't exist.
I'm going to leave that hanging. That's a really interesting quote to end on. I really like that. One thing I would observe, and it kept popping into my head all the way through, there's a kind of an old-fashioned thing that we frequently mocked as being unworkable and unreliable. That's Wikipedia. It's based on a set of arcane rules endlessly litigated over by cliques of grumpy humans. But it's actually looking pretty good. So maybe there's something in that for us. Anyway, this has been fascinating. We could have talked for hours, but you need a drink. So please thank our panellists.